This is one of the more involved pieces I illustrated over the past month, and I'll walk you through exactly how I created it, but this is the final piece. It could be a poster, but I actually illustrated it to be a greeting card, either for Valentine's Day or maybe an anniversary, or just a general love card that you could send to a significant other. Let's go to the initial sketch phase. So first I started the project knowing I wanted to create one or actually a couple of greeting card concepts. This just happened to be the first one I gravitated towards first. So here I did a few rough thumbnail drawings of different ideas for greeting cards. Here you can see the beginnings of that illustration start to stem from here. The same mixtape illustration. This is a birthday card concept. This is meant to be someone blowing bubble gum and it says "Stuck on You, Happy Valentine's Day, love." This is a thinking of you card. So I thought it was cute to have a cat popping their head up from the bottom, thinking of you. A couple more happy birthday concepts. This is more lettering focused with some smaller illustrations. Neon signs as a way to say happy birthday. And these two on the bottom are anniversary, Valentine's, or love-themed cards. This one says "Still Under Your Spell," so this would be a love potion bottle. And then this is a vinyl record, and it says "Still Crazy About You" around the record. Honestly, I like a lot of these and plan to illustrate even more of them into greeting card concepts, but moving forward, I decided to go with that mixtape concept. So then I moved into a larger, slightly more refined thumbnail drawing, true to size. So I have the same mixtape drawing. There's a little label that says "Side A Us." I didn't really like how the lettering was on the original thumbnail, so I wanted to fill the background with the lettering and have the tape be overlaid on top of it. So there's some layers going on, and I decided to go with a serif font with these fun ligatures. So at this point I was confident with the direction, and then I took a photo and opened that up into Procreate. So I always start with a photo of my sketch in the background. Here I added a loose grid with boxes of where I wanted the type to be. And then on a second layer, I started to sketch out that lettering, and this is all done with the Procreate 6B pencil in a blue color so that I can see it over my sketch. And then I started to draw the tape. What I did was turned off the type so I could see it, starting to sketch that out and play around with the placement. But I realized it was taking up a little bit too much space over the word "about," which would kind of make it a little bit difficult to read. So then I duplicated that layer, played around with the sizing, and as you can see, moved it down a little bit so that when I have that lettering, you can see it doesn't cover up too much and you can still read what it says. So I went with a pink background, and I did play around with various texture layers, but I think in the end I decided to just go with a solid colored background and have the texture on the type and tape, as you'll see. So moving on to the type, which is what I drew first, I would turn on that original sketch of the lettering, and then on a separate layer I'm doing the more refined version on top using black. So you can see it's never a perfect tracing, and I'm definitely improving things as I go and seeing how I can improve the lettering. Played around with color. Here it is pink, and then I added this textured layer on top, so you can see how that changes the color by adding this layer of texture. So we're going from like a solid pink to having this slightly reddish color around the edges, and you can see it just really makes a difference. So similar for the tape, I have the underlying sketch underneath, and then on a separate layer I start to draw on top of it. So again, you see it's not a complete tracing, but it's improving the drawing in that refined state. Here's the tape ribbon on a separate layer, so I try to keep things on separate layers so I can really control and fine-tune things. And then I started adding color. So for the background, I have this muted blue color for the tape, and then to further add some highlighting on a separate layer, added slightly darker, more vibrant blue. And then for this label section, a teal color for the background to really make that pop. So you can see how it's really coming together. And then I'll show you when I turn on the texture. So this kind of goes over the entire background. You probably won't be able to see it on screen, but it does make a difference. Same thing with the tape, adding a little bit of texture over the tape. This one you can see a little bit more easily because of the color differences. So basically I'm adding the background, which in this case is pink, as that texture. So with it turned off and then with it turned on. So basically that gives it like a faded look. And that's the final illustration. So those were all the steps from a small thumbnail sketch to a larger one, and then through all the phases to the final illustration. Let me know what you think of this design. Would you give it as a card to someone you love or have it as a poster hanging in your home? Next, I'll share some sketchbook drawings from the last month. I love how this spread turned out. I used a black pen, red Tombow marker, and purple colored pencil, and tried to create a little bit of dimension by layering the colored pencil and having darker shading on the bottom and then going lighter towards the top. This was actually done with a pretty cheap colored pencil that I didn't enjoy the experience of drawing with. My favorite color pencils of choice are the Caran d'Ache Luminance series, but I didn't have a bright, vibrant purple color like this, so I used that set. I was also very intentional with the spacing here, leaving a lot of breathing room at the top and balancing everything. These are some quick portrait sketches, and I used photos of Audrey Hepburn as references for each one of these. So I started with a brush pen to create each of the portraits, and then with a gray Faber-Castell brush pen, I filled in the background to give it a little bit of texture with these horizontal lines, which I like how that created contrast and made the portraits really pop. This first page on the left, I created all of these drawings with the Lamy Safari fountain pen. And I have a video on the channel where I show you my entire process and whether I recommend that specific pen or drawing with a fountain pen in general, because it is a different experience if you're not used to it. A little sketch of my cat. This is a Victorian home in San Francisco, and then also some lettering. When you're combining multiple drawings and using one art supply, it has a nice cohesive look and feel to it. And I also like how it contrasts with this super colorful page on the right. So for this one, I started by laying the color first. So if you're ever someone who doesn't know how to start a sketchbook, or you just get a little intimidated by the blank page, this is a great tip. Just fill your page with any kind of color. In this case, I was using Tombow markers, and I just kind of randomly laid it across the page using about 4 different colors. And then on top of it, I used a Japanese brush pen to create these little drawings. And then when you do this, it creates a fun look and feel, especially the contrast of the black brush pen on top of the color. I recommend trying to do something like this in your own sketchbook. So similar to this page, the same idea of starting your sketchbook spread with a layer of color first, but here I'm using a different art supply. On the left here, I'm using a really thick, broad, metallic gold Posca marker to lay out this texture, intentionally having it create this loose, streaky feel to it. I like the way that looks. And then on the right, I used 2 different smaller broad tip Posca markers. Both of these are neon colors, red and pink, although this looks a little bit more orangey. And I tried to create a little bit of a gradient by having the pink streak over the orange or red pen, which creates a nice effect. And then again, on top of it, I used various black pens to create the drawings on top. On the left is a theme collection of various drawings of telephones. I was going with the theme of communication, and I used a Lamy Safari fountain pen for all of these drawings just to keep them consistent. I like doing this with my sketchbook, taking one object, one theme, one idea, and just filling the page with it. It's a lot of fun, and it looks really cool when you're done. On the right here, for the line work, I use the same Lamy Safari fountain pen, and then I used 3 different Faber-Castell brush pens, a light gray, a medium gray, and then I have a darker gray that I used very selectively. This was actually based off of another drawing from the graphic novel artist Lizzie Stewart for her graphic novel Allison. I really liked the scene of someone outside of a bookstore, and I wanted to try to recreate it in my own way. And then I have 2 sketches from my lettering sketchbook. First is this spread, which says fact or fiction. And I have some notes here on the art supplies I used. So I drew and filled the lettering with a Pilot Bravo marker pen, and I wrote that I loved the experience of it. Some pens are just much more pleasant to use than others, and so I'm glad I took a note of that. I was really inspired by a recent book I got on the Futura typeface. So that's kind of what I'm trying to emulate here with my lettering, is that typeface. So I use a black pen or marker for the lettering, and the neon pink is that same broad-tipped Posca pen that you saw in the previous sketch from the other sketchbook. So when you compare it here, you can see how different using the same art supply on different materials can really change the effect. So this is more of a, not quite white, but like a cream paper versus this tan brown paper, where I think the Posca markers really shine and they're very vibrant. It's just a lot of contrast, especially combined with the black. Something to think about as you're using the same art supplies you have, but on different types of paper, you will have different effects.